Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Since entering Parliament 10 years ago, Marama Davidson has become a co-leader, been appointed a minister, and has helped the Greens reach its largest ever caucus. She's always been a staunch advocate for children, so it comes as no surprise that last week the Green Party launched an open letter calling on the Minister for Children to adopt 7 promises to children in state care, so no more tamariki fall into harm. One of those promises is to make it a requirement that Oranga Tamariki give rangatahi leaving care the support they need to find suitable accommodation. Later, we'll speak to 19-year-old Ihorangi Reweti-Peters about his experience in the care system and the challenges he faced. But first, on the front page, Marama Davidson joins us to discuss what more we need to do to make sure every child growing up in this country has a fighting chance. Marama, when it comes to the 7 promises to children in state care, why call for this now?
The government, the system, has been failing tamariki for so long. And we heard about that, right? We've heard about that from survivors, from people who have had generational, bad, harmful impacts. This is the least we can do, is call for more accountability to make sure that the government, any governments, are prioritising the well-being of tamariki, the well-being of young people in care and the well-being of young people coming out of care. So this is the Greens wanting to put forward a way that ensures that our system is one that actually does look after and centre and prioritise the well-being of tamariki.
Is Oranga Tamariki not doing that at the moment, do you think?
We have seen from the Royal Commission of Inquiry into State Care that this has long been a system failing tamariki, but unfortunately we are still hearing today, right now, from survivors, from people, from advocates, that it's still failing tamariki. And so we all owe it as a country. I know that people care about this. We all owe it to ensure, first and foremost, well-being, tamariki, our funding, our political laws, our decisions. We should be choosing to do everything we can to put their livelihoods first, to make sure whānau can support and care for their tamariki and make sure that tamariki in state care are also provided for, as well as when they come out of state care.
It is pretty disappointing to see that even after the Abuse and Care Royal Commission of Inquiry, that some of these experiences are still happening to tamariki and rangatahi in care. What do we do?
We need big system change. For a start, why don't we pick up the recommendations from the report, from that big years and years of work with expertise receiving and hearing directly from survivors, sometimes generations of survivors in families, where, they also heard from people today, from frontline community organisations also. So we need to make sure that we're picking up the recommendations. How about that for a starting point? They did so much work. They looked at the research, the evidence. They heard from expertise about exactly how systems can properly care. They came up with ways, step by step, of what we can improve in the law, in the policy, in the practice. How about for a starting point, we pick up those recommendations?
What stood out for me in the 7 promises is this one, number 3, every child must be supported every step of their journey. Now, I know that you have a bill in the biscuit tin at the moment in regards to actually requiring Oranga Tamariki to make sure that a person leaving care has suitable accommodation. When I read that, I find it amazing that it is not already a requirement.
Right? You would think that the least we can do for these children who have been in the system and are coming out of care, young children, that the least we can do is provide them with that really basic support for the rest of their lives to be able to flourish. What we are seeing, however, and hearing right now is that young people, even with advocates and support workers, are being told at every stop, sorry, we cannot help you. There is no emergency housing. There is no way of ensuring that you have adequate income. At the same time, we are seeing this government drive funding cuts to the very frontline community organisations who would try and step in and fill in that gap.
Well, who are picking up the slack?
That's it, picking up the slack. Just weeks ago, I was in Otara, one of the most well-established, respected local community hubs, Otara Youth Hub, who have had their funding removed. They were picking up the slack in a big, real way. So we are seeing the community providers and care having their funding cut, but at the same time, government departments have had the political decisions from this current government say, I'm sorry, we are not going to offer emergency housing support anymore. I'm sorry, the young people are going to have to be turned away. Young people are left to fend for themselves, and they literally are doing that on the streets in whatever ways they can. So, that has to stop.
Yeah, and the leaving care process, I'm privileged enough not to have had to know anything about it before actually researching it and speaking to you today. But the process on transitioning out of care starts at 15 years old. Those are some pretty big conversations and decisions to be placed on behalf of a 15, 16-year-old.
I too am privileged not to have had to be in the care system, to have been provided with the care that I require. But if we put these barriers right at that early stage of not supporting young people with housing, with support, that is going to set them up. They are more likely to have challenge for the rest of their lives. One of the best things we can do, which is what my bill is about, is requiring in legislation that no young person is to leave care without appropriate housing and the support that they need. I don't know how come we have to have a law for this. I would have thought this is just something we all agree to as a community, as a country, but it's not happening. And so it's about making the government accountable.
How do shambolic cuts to service providers, poor communication with providers about their contracts, and no assurance about transitioning children and family to alternative services fit with her stated commitment that child safety is her priority?
Mr. Speaker, I actually refuse to stand here and be lectured by a member of that previous government who made absolutely no progress when it came to the safety of the well-being of our young people. The state of Oranga Tamariki when I took over was absolutely disgusting, and I'm not going to allow that to continue.
I saw some figures from RNZ that revealed that in the first 5 months of this year, 99 children in Oranga Tamariki care have stayed in motels. In what world is this okay?
In a world where consecutive and successive governments have depleted providing housing as a public good and a human right, which is what has happened. I am proud that we were part of the last government with Labour, where for the first time since the 1970s, we were building back our public and community housing supply in a rate that hasn't been seen since the 70s. Good, but this government has come in and removed that agenda to ensure that there is public housing. We would, for a starting point, as the Greens, build 35,000 more public homes in 5 years to basically remove everyone from the waiting list, from the public housing waiting list. That in itself, that's why we have children having to be raised in motels and emergency accommodation, which none of us want. None of us want that. It ended up being a stopgap measure because we have stopped providing public housing as a country. And can I take us back for a little sec? This was something that the New Zealand society, I suppose, has been really proud of since way back in the early from 1950s at least, where we decided as a government a duty of care would ensure that there is housing for everyone, that it is affordable and quality, and that is the proud tradition, I suppose, of New Zealand's history of state housing. That, we got into, I guess, through the the 80s particularly, we started on this real denigration of providing that public good, of that responsibility, we started selling off state housing. Children living in motels today is a direct consequence of that, and it is shameful. It is shameful that as a country, we have what we need to make sure that no children go without a home, go without kai, go without support, but this government is choosing not to make the decision to do that.
I know that you've been in Parliament for 10 years this year.
Yes.
And in November, actually your maiden speech, 2015, you said, in my community, people are living in homes so filled with mould that it is making kids sick. In my community, people are working 2 or more jobs and are still struggling to pay for the food and that their children need. Families are literally struggling to survive. And that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Has anything changed?
Sadly, we are seeing government right now denying people inadequate income, in effect cutting minimum wages, in effect housing costs are higher, rental costs are higher, wages are lower, and especially for those on the lowest income. So I was proud that there was a welfare working group, say a report. Again, lots of work, experts and people at the front line bringing their stories to the table to be able to show actually the income support provided by government is well below the poverty line. How on earth are people supposed to get ahead at all? And you had the likes of a former New Zealand Business Roundtable chair, president, leader, shall we say, after hearing all the submissions, and this is the point I want to be really clear about here. After hearing the submissions of people trying to do their best with what little they had, really trying to do their best, but just so clearly inadequate incomes, and you had the New Zealand former business chair as part of that committee hearing these submissions, saying straight up, it's just not enough. That's not enough income. We're not going to end poverty with this inadequate level of income. So I'm really sad that governments have chosen to keep people, whānau and tamariki in poverty. I'm really proud that the Greens have provided an alternative for people to see. Actually, we don't have to be like this. There is a better way. We've got enough in this beautiful country of ours that people care about each other in this beautiful country of ours. We can end poverty. We can do it right now.
I know that there was obviously the Child Poverty Reduction Act enacted in 2018. Do you think that that has actually done anything to alleviate child poverty in this country? Because I know that there's a report every year. The latest one, for example, it's called the Child and Youth Strategy, et cetera, et cetera. It was released in April and it's required under the Act.
That's right.
It's pretty grim reading. Still, we've got experiences of abuse and neglect for children continuing to be high. Material hardship is trending upwards. More kids are in families on the benefit. Avoidable hospitalisations are worse. Educational achievement is worse. I mean, is there any point of that legislation, or do you think it was a bit of a box-ticking exercise?
Yeah, I can see why people would understandably think that, right? When the government is doing the bare minimum and not achieving those targets. The purpose of the legislation is good. It is to try and keep governments accountable. So we do need to try and have measures, legislation, policies to keep government accountable. Perhaps without the legislation, we wouldn't be able to see those areas of failure. But the legislation on its own, it's never going to fix up those mistakes, those failures, absolutely. So we have to pull in also, which is what I'm really proud about. The Green Party are pulling in a focus to that legislation that would also require the government to pick up the recommendations from the Royal Commission inquiry into state abuse, for example. So on its own, yeah, and when the government is failing to achieve targets that I'll just say for the Green Party weren't even as ambitious as we would have liked, but still targets nonetheless, when governments are doing the bare minimum and not achieving them, I totally get how it could seem like a waste of time, but it's why we also have to bring in that extra accountability, like picking up the recommendations from the review, for example.
It is quite, and it's not the first Royal Commission of Inquiry that I've seen or recommendations made from any kind of inquiry that there isn't actually a requirement to pick up all of the recommendations of this very expensive, very long exercise. I mean, why is that?
And a very long exercise, a really grounded exercise. I just want to make clear for your listeners that exercise, it had survivors first and foremost, their expertise. They are the biggest specialists in expertise that we could hope for. But it had research, it had organisations grounded in doing this work for decades. So you would think that the least we can do all together, all MPs across the House, is give any government a mandate. Come on, pick these up. They're not just going to benefit survivors. They're going to benefit our entire community. They're going to transform the accountability of government to properly centre well-being, to properly centre healing responses for people who have been harmed by the state system. So you would think, this is where I think I plea to the people. Where does the mandate and the accountability really come from? It comes from the people. And you have that power to your listeners. You have that power with your vote, with your submissions. We know that if more people were to realise the power that they have in their very own hands, that they could actually ensure that governments pick up and make the changes that are required to nurture our tamariki.
I invite Chloe Swarbrick to withdraw and apologise for an offensive comment made in the House yesterday.
I won't be doing that, Mr. Speaker.
Then the member will leave the House. The ayes are 68, the noes are 54, the motion is agreed. The member will leave the House. Point of order, the Honourable.
And lastly, while I was doing my research as well, I read your maiden speech, obviously, as you can probably tell. But I also saw that you were kicked out of the House after ignoring a warning from the Speaker not to make a point of order shortly after you became an MP. And that was after John Key accused Labor of backing rapists, and opposition MPs obviously staged a walkout. Now, I thought that was probably a good thing to bring up at the moment, because when asked about that at the time, you said there are a million rules and the only one I know is the one that I broke. And you have to be looking at Chloe right now with some admiration, right? Like a little renegade after your own heart.
Absolutely. We as a whole caucus stand fully beside Chloe, because the point is there is genocide in Gaza. This government needs to do everything it can to recognise the independent statehood of Palestine. It's not doing that. We stand by asking politicians to find their backbone, to make sure that we as a country are joining, nearly every other blimmin' country, and actually demanding that this genocide stop. The mokopuna in Gaza deserve for all of us politicians to have a backbone. The reporters like yourself that have been killed, over 200, deserve for us as politicians to have a backbone to call for an end to genocide. And similarly, I think on record from memory, I think I have the record for being kicked out of the House in record time, shortly, within, I think, 5 days of becoming an MP, even going into the House. And again, it was to be really clear that no Prime Minister, and it was John Key at the time, has a right to throw rape onto the table as a political tool. And we in the House, women, stood up to make a point of order to ask him to apologise, including some of us as survivors of sexual violence, to ask him to apologise for throwing rape across the table as a political tool to be used against us. We knew that when the Speaker was calling for the point of order, he said, no more points of order or you'll be asked to leave. And I was the first one to be asked to leave. He'd lost his patience by then. I'm proud of making that stand. I'm proud of Chloe making the stand on behalf of all of us who have a backbone to call for an end to genocide.
Thanks for joining us, Marama.
Thank you. Kia ora, Chelsea.
Ihorangi Reweti-Peters entered into the state care system at just 7 months old. At the age of 16, he spoke about his experiences at the Abuse and Care Royal Commission of Inquiry, where he chronicled abuse at the hands of his caregivers and the struggles of navigating a broken system. By that time, he'd been in 7 placements in just 6 years. Now we check in with Ihorangi about what life's been like since then and what the process of leaving OT is actually like. So, Ihorangi, you spoke about your experiences in care at just 16 years old. How has the transition out of state care been for you?
In some aspects, the transition out of Oranga Tamariki care has been positive, but also it has been really hard to be able to find the right support for me to be able to be on a journey of healing.
And what kind of support would that be?
Mental health support, access to finances, being able to be supported to be able to live independently and away from Oranga Tamariki.
I saw on the Oranga Tamariki website that there's a section that basically explains how the agency prepares rangatahi for leaving care. Now, that process is meant to begin at the age of 15 and it includes discussions about their transition, but also encouragement to express views, etc. I mean, did you experience any of this?
I had a family group conference, or a transitions to adulthood family group conference, as Oranga Tamariki likes to call it. But to be honest, it wasn't what the Act states that it should be. It was more of an opportunity for Oranga Tamariki to talk about what they are doing positively in my life. But at that point in my life, Oranga Tamariki was not working to the best of its ability. And to this point, I still agree with many voices saying that Oranga Tamariki needs to be dismantled and that the provisions of care need to come back to whānau hapu and iwi. I mean, Oranga Tamariki still has a lot of work to do. And back to your question, I was not prepared well to leave care. If I was prepared well to leave care, I would have been supported to find alternative accommodation. I would have been provided with financial advisors to be able to make better financial decisions. They would have supported me to get into the workforce. In saying that, though, I am in the workforce, but also that took a lot of my own work to be able to be better equipped to help our most vulnerable tamariki, rangatahi and whānau involved with Oranga Tamariki.
Yeah, I mean, I did see that there's also, for rangatahi Māori, it's important to maintain and strengthen their whakapapa links to whānau. How was your experience with that?
Well, Oranga Tamariki says that they have strengthened my connections to my whakapapa, but no, they haven't. It was all of the work that I did to reconnect with my whānau and my whakapapa. Like, come on, Oranga Tamariki. Let's do better for our most vulnerable. These are young people who have experienced abuse, trauma from early years of life. And with the removal of Section 7AA from the Oranga Tamariki Act, which is the nitty-gritty section that allows rangatahi and tamariki to be provided with connections to whakapapa, whānau, hapu and iwi, now our rangatahi and tamariki transitioning out of care will not have that crucial support to reconnect with their whakapapa. My whakapapa reading through my files was redacted because Oranga Tamariki said that it was confidential and it's not appropriate for a rangatahi to have access to quote-unquote sensitive information. But that is my whakapapa, not whakapapa that Oranga Tamariki should be redacting because they believe that it is sensitive information.
She's calling for Oranga Tamariki to be stripped of its responsibilities.
Divesting the resources from Oranga Tamariki into iwi or hapu or community-led services that actively support and enhance the lives of our young people.
Is Oranga Tamariki fit for purpose?
No, not at all. There are very few of us who have actually made it out unscathed. There are very few of us that can look back at our childhoods and be happy about them.
So take me through what happens when you leave care. You've been in the system, I believe, since 7 months old, and of course you spoke out at age 16. You're now 19. What kind of level of support does OT give you at the moment, or has given you to leave care? So you said that there's not much help finding suitable accommodation?
Well, so obviously, let's roll this back. There's a transition support line, which their goal is to support young people still in care, but in the transition space from their age 16 up until 25. They work with rangatahi up until the age of 25. They also provide the ETRR, entitlement to remain or return to a caregiver who that rangatahi would like. That is legislated up until the age of 21. So I used ETRR to be able to live with my grandfather and be provided with that support, where we work out an agreement on how much I pay per week. I've also been provided in some cases with a maximum of 5 sessions, counselling or miri support for me. That only comes in instalments of 5 sessions because it is quote unquote too expensive for the taxpayer to be paying. But in my eyes, that is ridiculous. We should be provided with the appropriate supports to be able to do better and ultimately be safe and stable in our place. Oranga Tamariki are also supposed to be providing support to rangatahi in terms of mental health, well-being, health, and expenses that day to day we need to be able to live in this world and be independent from the Oranga Tamariki system. However, they solely rely on the Ministry of Social Development to provide that support, or say, have you contacted Ministry of Social Development even before Oranga Tamariki will consider to look at providing the basic needs, which include food, accommodation, transport costs in case there is a tangi or a funeral. And yes, I do get that Oranga Tamariki need to be careful with their expenditure, but these are some of our most vulnerable young people that need extra support to be able to live in this world.
Yeah, and it's suffice to say that those young people going through care, and yourself included, do have mental health issues that need to be addressed.
100%. Our young people, including myself, are vulnerable. They've experienced abuse in early years of life. They've also experienced abuse through care. They've also had traumatic uplifts. And yes, our rangatahi need to have a wraparound support, which includes mental health and healthcare, funded by Oranga Tamariki.
From your experience with Oranga Tamariki, do you think everyone that works there cares?
I believe that there are people within Oranga Tamariki that care, but there are also other people who do not care about the lives of our most vulnerable. And I guess that's a culture that needs to change within the ministry. And I'm hopeful that Oranga Tamariki will change that culture. But in saying that, we are seeing a chief executive who has come from the Ministry of Defence and Ministry of Justice, who is bringing that punitive approach to caring for our most vulnerable. I think change needs to start from the top, but also I go back to my earlier point that Oranga Tamariki needs to be dismantled and the provisions of care need to be provided to whānau hapu and iwi.
Thanks for joining us, Ihorangi.
No problem.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.